Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing a little batch wrap-up for 5 middle grade graphic novels that I read sort of all in one go. Last month in August, I finally felt like I was back on a roll in terms of reading books at a reasonable rate, which I hadn't been for a long time, but I was sort of in an emotional rut with the books I was reading. I was liking them all, I was giving lots of things 4 stars, but I wasn't really emotionally responding to anything in either like a positive or negative way, which I want to be. And so I had 3 middle grade graphic novels out from the library that I had taken out on impulse a while back, and I decided to read those along with 2 I already owned as sort of an attempt to jostle something loose in my reading, and I think it worked. I gave these ratings ranging from 3 to 5 stars, and I had a nice broad range of emotional reactions to them. Also, I got to look at a lot of pretty art because there's a lot of real pretty art in this batch. So I read these all in like the last week of August, and I sort of alternated between library book and book I own. There was one of these that was a reread for me because the 2 I owned were the Dragon Society and the Dragon Tapestry. I wanted to reread book 1 before I read the new book 3. But I'm gonna go through these in the order I read them. So the first book I read was one of the library books, and that is Pilu of the Woods by Nguyen. This is a standalone, and it has beautiful, beautiful art. That is the main thing I want to show you, is how beautiful and how sweet this art is. It's very whimsical and cute, and I love the color palette. Here's some more nature landscape stuff. So that's the thing I loved about this most. It is about a little girl named Willow who gets in an argument with her older sister and runs away into the woods with the family dog and meets another girl named Pilu, who is like a tree spirit. She's a magical tree creature of some sort, and their problems and the reasons they've both run away from their families into the woods end up sort of as parallels and complements to each other, so that each of them can kind of help the other overcome their problems and be ready to go back to their families. The thing about this book that made me personally pull away from it is that it is a dead mother book. It sort of goes out of its way structurally to avoid saying that the mother is dead, like head on, but it's very clear that that unspoken death of the mother is at the heart of the story, and it is really what the entire thing is about. And as soon as I realized this, which was fairly early on, I sort of noped out of the story and like emotionally removed myself from the experience of reading it, because I didn't want to have that particular cathartic experience. I've discovered that I've become fine with books that have dead mothers in them as part of the plot, but for something like this where it is really like the entire deal, I apparently still have issues. So from very early on, I put myself in a mode where I was pretty much only reading this for the art, which was lovely, and sort of skimming over the substance of the story. And because I think I was reading it a bit at a remove, there were things about this that struck me as a bit odd. There are parts of this with the relationship between Willow and Pilu that seem overly on the nose about what they're getting at, what the theme is, how you're supposed to feel about it. And then there are parts that are way more abstract, and I felt like it sort of veered wildly between those 2 poles. There are these little like sad globule things. Them. Do you see them? Is it focusing on them? There we go. That show up in a bunch of pages sort of reacting to everything that's happening to Willow, and you don't really know what's going on with them until they turn out to sort of be her inner monsters that are like her feelings that she's bottling up. And I thought that was a nice sentiment, but it was a little bit out there in how it was executed. Like, you're never sure if they're real or not? Like, what's going on there? Like, this is obviously fantasy with some magic involved because Pilu exists, but then, like, what about this? Anyways, would recommend if you're looking for some of that, like, heart-wrenching family trauma that I wasn't into, but I gave this 3 stars for my personal reaction to it. Next was my reread of The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. This was a 5-star read for me when I first read it. I had no intention of changing my ratings and I didn't see any reason to. This struck me as really, really short though, given that the subsequent 2 books have been significantly longer. This is about Greta, who is the daughter of a blacksmith who is learning blacksmithing from her mother, and Minette, who has left the monastery where she was raised to be a priestess after a traumatic event that took away her prophetic abilities and a bunch of her memories as well. Memory is a big theme in this. Greta and Minette both learn how to take care of these little tea dragon creatures from a couple named Ezekiel and Eric. And the thing about the tea dragons is they're little domesticated dragons that bond very closely with their caretakers, and if you brew the leaves that come out of their heads and drink the tea, you can see some of the memories that tea dragon shared with their person. So it's all about building new memories as a way of healing on Minette's side, and on Greta's side it's sort of about learning skills that maybe might fall out of use if people didn't care about them, such as her blacksmithing, and also learning how to care for tea dragons and finding meaning and passion in that. This is a lovely, inclusive fantasy world. There are queer characters in this. There's a disabled character who uses a wheelchair, and the art is just so extremely beautiful and whimsical. I love the way the pages are put together with all the colors and the way different sort of floral and patterned backgrounds are used in different panels and between panels. It's just a really lovely experience and a world that I want to sink into. And there is some supplemental material that's very text heavy in the back that's supposed to be excerpts from the Tea Dragon handbook, and just reading these few pages of mostly text takes as much time or longer than reading the entire story that led up to that. But it also gives you a chance to immerse yourself in the world building a little more. My next library read was The Witch Boy by Molly Knox Ostertag. Let me try to get an angle where I don't get a weird reflection on this. There we go. So this is the first in a trilogy of graphic novels, and I'm glad that I knew that going in, because I think if I had viewed this as a standalone, I would have felt like there was a missed opportunity for bigger stories with these characters. This is set in a contemporary fantasy world that we really don't learn all that much about broadly. Like, it might just be our world, but one of these secret societies of magic users secretly exist things. I'm not sure. But we're focused on Aster, who is from this very seclusive and insular extended family of magic users. They all live in a big house together. Him and his parents and his grandmother and his aunts and uncles and all of his cousins, they all sort of homeschool to learn magic, and they don't interact with the outside world except that they're supposed to fight demons or something. And the thing about this magic community is that there are some pretty strict gender roles that go with the magic. Women learn witchcraft, and boys learn shape-shifting so that they can hunt demons, but Aster has not felt the call of shape-shifting. He hasn't been visited by the animal spirits or anything yet, as the other boys have, and he instead firmly believes, and he's correct, that he has an aptitude for witchcraft, which he is forbidden from learning. There is this like rarely spoken of secret traumatic history with the grandmother's brother, who apparently also wanted to be a witch, and something went horribly wrong there, which is the reason everyone thinks it would be terrible if Aster were to learn witchcraft. And the main plot of this, in which the boys who are learning shapeshifting are going missing, is eventually wrapped up along with the mystery of what happened to the grandmother's brother. Aster also sneaks away from the family compound and makes friends with a normal non-magical girl named Charlie, who has a sort of more healthy outsider perspective on a lot of this that really helps Aster. And I think that this is pretty obvious the way it's written, that the witchcraft versus shapeshifter dichotomy is sort of a metaphor for transgender issues. Although Aster is not explicitly trans, the way he deals with being a witch and the way he and his family eventually come to terms with it is framed very much like a transgender experience. I gave this 4 stars. For me, Molly Ostertag's art style is completely serviceable, but otherwise like not particularly a standout. I think her character designs are really good. They do the job. They're expressive. They tell you everything you would hope a character design would convey about the characters, but overall, the aesthetics of this art style don't stand out for me. I have read one other thing before that had Molly Ostertag's art, even though it wasn't written by her. That was the webcomic Strong Female Protagonist. So I sort of knew what to expect from her art going in, but I didn't really know what to expect from the story, and I was mostly pretty pleased. So this was 4 stars, and I will definitely be picking up the sequels. And then the Dragon Tapestry, which is the new one in this series. It's the direct sequel to the Dragon Society. The second book in the trilogy, the Dragon Festival, was a prequel that takes place sometime before, so the characters from that one actually do show up in this one, but they're all grown up. I had read the Dragon Festival recently enough that I didn't feel like I needed to revisit it before jumping into this one. I think that was a decent choice. The art style in this strikes me as being fairly similar to the art in book 1, but sort of more saturated colors. Like, I think it's a relatively similar color palette, but you get some richer tones, whereas the first book aired more on the pastel side. As the title indicates, this is a sort of meandering tapestry of a book where you sort of touch in with a lot of different characters in these sort of transitional moments of their lives. Either that or reflecting back on past transitional moments of their lives. If there is anything like a main driving story arc to this, it is probably Greta thinking about what she is going to make as a blacksmith to impress this master blacksmith who is thinking of taking her on as an apprentice. But we also dive more deeply into Minette's inner life and how she is wrestling a little more profoundly than with the initial memory loss that she was suffering from in book 1, with a feeling of being unmoored from what she had believed was her entire calling and her purpose in life, and finding a new path. And that's really, I think, a theme throughout the books and throughout the whole series, is about all these different characters' relationships with the things that are their calling and their passion. And in this book, you see how those feelings and those callings sometimes change over time, and how that's okay. Greta is taking care of a tea dragon of her own, Ginseng, who has lost all of her leaves in mourning of her previous caretaker and has not yet recovered enough to grow new leaves a year on. We get some more lovely moments from Eric and Ezekiel's backstory. They of course used to be sort of a warrior monster hunter duo who are now retired and living a very different life from that. Plus this visiting blacksmith who is taking some time away from his forge and reflecting on how He no longer finds as much meaning in it as he used to. Rin and Aiden from book 2 show up. Again, I love seeing grown-up Rin. This is just all sorts of lovely and warm and fuzzy. I gave it 5 stars, as I gave the first 2 books. The one single thing that bugged me about this is so minor, and I only noticed it because I read these 2 practically back to back, is that there is a change in the character design for Minette that just doesn't make any sense. Her legs have gotten skinnier. And I know this is extremely petty, but her legs looked like this throughout all of book 1, you see? And it's been a year, and I understand that she's maybe grown taller, and so there might be a bit of a proportion change, but not that much. And like, maybe if you assume that her like hoof legs are extremely fluffy, maybe she's decided to like start trimming her leg hair as like a personal grooming thing, which would make sense, except that the hooves are much smaller as well. So I think I can figure out a bit why this change happened, because we get some more backstory about Minette's like time as a priestess, and we learn a little bit more about her people. And she was the priestess of like this mythical ancestor of her people who takes the form of like this deer god. And so I think her legs are meant to look more like deer legs than they did in the original one, to sort of tie that connection together between like the deer god and Minette's people. But it felt like an odd sort of little visual retcon for me that wasn't totally necessary, and only because I read them so close together did I find that a little jarring. And then the last book in this batch was the 3rd and final library book, and that is Hicotea by Lorena Alvarez. And this is a standalone sequel to Night Lights, which is about this same little girl, Sandy, but this is a complete standalone, and if you were going to pick up just one of these books, I would actually recommend Hikotea instead of Night Lights. Because while the art is absolutely stunning in both of these, Night Lights felt really more insubstantial than I wanted it to be. It felt like it could have done a lot more with its themes. I sort of feel the same way about this one, but there's more here, and I liked it. First, I'm gonna show you the art. I'm gonna show you some of the most like exquisite pages, just so you can see what's going on here. There's a lot, and it's very beautiful and very imaginative. In this story, Sandy's school group goes on like a science trip to a local wetlands. And it's basically a portal fantasy. Sandy sort of picks up a turtle and looks inside the shell and gets whooped into this magical land inside the turtle shell, where she meets the shell's inhabitant, a turtle named Hikotea, who has become a recluse from the magical wetland world that is being sort of slowly vanished and eaten away by like a mysterious being. And it's very odd, very little is explained. I never really understood who the magical nemesis was that was consuming the wetland, or how Sandy ultimately triumphed over it. But regardless, the basic structure of the portal fantasy is there, and that gave me something to cling to. The themes here are sort of big and vague. I think it was a metaphor for environmentalism, of being like a caretaker and a steward for the world you live in, and learning to explore it and learn about it as opposed to consuming it. But that's never really made clear by tying it into like the real world storyline at all. This also feels like a celebration of creativity. Sandy is an artist with a wild imagination that is recognizable from book 1 if you've read book 1. And you can read the whole portal fantasy adventure as like a product of Sandy's wild creativity when let loose in a swamp. This is what she comes up with in her journal, instead of like science observations. Anyways, this is a little baffling, but still really enjoyable, and I gave it 4 stars. Anyhow, that's it. That's my short batch wrap-up of 5 middle grade graphic novels. I would say The Witch Boy maybe skews a little more upper middle grade, lower YA, but it was still in the middle grade section of my library, and there's nothing inappropriate in it for younger kids. They are all definitely books that also I think will have appeal for adult readers. Some of them maybe more so for adult readers. Like, I don't know what the ostensibly intended younger readership would actually make of something like Hikotea. I almost think this would work better for grown-ups. So anyways, let me know if you've read any of these or what you're planning to. Let me know what you think. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.